guys are going to hear the whole thing, at least anyway. So, good morning to you, and welcome to this day at New Life Expo. My name is Keith Seelan. I'm going to be talking to you today some about the details in my new book, The Humaniverse Guide, Will E.T. Talk With Us? It's currently at the publisher in the editing process, so it should be out in a few weeks. And I'll be discussing some of the points regarding preparations and an urgency for planning that humankind has to do in order to prepare for not only first contact, but two concepts that I call enduring global acknowledgement, or EGA, and enduring global relationship, EGR. And those are the relationships after the first message of contact comes back and forth. What's going to happen after that? There's an urgency for planning, and as you'll see here, there's really not been much done in the way of proactive planning for that process. So just a little bit about myself to introduce to you. What got me into the ufology profession, study, research, and being a student and everything about it. It began in my childhood, and I can attribute a lot of it to this person here. That's my father, Harold. He flew a B-17 during World War II. He flew 44 missions with his crew. And he told me stories in at least 5 of those missions where they experienced this phenomenon, what were then called Foo Fighters. They would fly in under intelligent control. It's at speeds that no human endeavor could even match. They would fly alongside the planes, above them, below them, in front of them, dart around at fantastic speeds. The Allies and the Axis parties each thought it was advanced technology from the other, but as we now know, there was nothing that humankind ever had to do influencing any of this. So that was my initial entry, but I had another big entry point throughout my life. It wasn't an experience, but throughout my life, as time went on, many more reports of UFO and UAP, which are unidentified aerial phenomenon. That's a generational term for that. Sightings and experiences, including the last 10 years or so, it seems an exponential increase in them. So it intrigued me all along to where I had begun studying them many years ago, and I put lots of research into it. And here's an example of a map. It's a little dated, but these are the reported sightings. If you can find the smallest dot on here, that represents a sighting, a report. But as you can see here, there's so many reports of these phenomena, and there have been so many more that have not been reported in addition to this. So if everything was reported, this thing would be one great green blur of a map. Throughout all walks of life, throughout recorded history, there's been so many reports from influential, famous people, and I'll just give you a short inventory of a few of them. This is President Reagan and his wife Nancy. He had 2 separate sighting experiences, one as a private citizen, one as governor of California, aboard airplanes where he instructed his pilot to fly and try and follow them as best he could. He couldn't keep up with it. This is Harry S. Truman, who was the president, as you know, sitting at the time of the atom bombs, but also in 1947 during the Roswell incident. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm not going to use the microphone for that. Good, thanks. It's curious to note that with Harry Truman, right after the Roswell, within a few weeks, there were more government agencies created than at any time in our history, including the CIA, the NSA, National Security Agency, the Air Force broke separately from the Army, the CID, and other agencies. So Roswell incident is very seminal in this whole history of the modern age of ufology. Another president, Dwight Eisenhower, who is a private citizen in 1952, witnessed, along with many other people, sightings for 2 weeks of aerial phenomena. My talk is circular in that a lot of points I'm going to talk about here I'll mention later on, and they'll circle back into what I've mentioned right now. And this is an example with Dwight Eisenhower. So all these factors are relating to each other, and it equates to one big phenomenon. So I just want to mention that as we go on, but I'll mention more about Eisenhower later. George Washington had his own experience while at the Battle of Valley Forge, caused him to alter his military strategy in that it produced a victory for the colonial forces and for the rest of the war. Christopher Columbus, for 2 weeks before he landed in the New World, his crew spotted lights in the night sky, flying under intelligent control and seemingly pointing towards one spot on the horizon, which turned out to be San Sanibel Island. Winston Churchill, British Prime Minister, who before World War II had his own private sighting. And it's interesting to note that all of these dignitaries, because of their positions, were privy to conversations about more details that the government has had regarding the UFO, UAP phenomena. So, but that doesn't end there. Like I said, this cuts through all walks of life. This is the Apollo 11 astronauts who had their own experiences while on their mission to the moon. Later on, Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14. It's interesting to note, after his experience, he became a staunch UFO advocate for the rest of his life. Private people, just like you and me. This is Betty and Barney Hill. September 1961, their famous abduction incident, where they were taken aboard a craft and given advice by the ETs that were in communication with them. The military is extrinsically involved in this whole episode, this whole phenomenon. This is Major Jesse Marcel of the Roswell incident, who, as you see here, posing before holding fake wreckage, imposed upon him by his superior officers to try and debunk the facts that the U.S. Army Air Force had recovered a crashed spacecraft and alien bodies with it. But the military presence goes on and on. This is Colonel Charles Halt, who was Deputy Base Commander of the Rendlesham Forest incident at Woodbridge Bentwaters Air Force Base, December 1980 in Great Britain. For 2 nights, his team went out in the field, and the second night he had tape recording of a 2.5-hour conversation where he was broadcasting what was going on in the skies. There's radar evidence, physical trace evidence, video, audio evidence, all going into the archives of the UFO experience. You know this, may know this person, Stephen Hawking, who was a private citizen before he developed his disease, had his own sighting incident experience. This is Clyde Tombaugh, discoverer of Pluto at the Lowell Observatory in Arizona. Later on, as a professor in the University of New Mexico system, had experienced many incidents of green and orange fireballs, those Foo Fighters that I mentioned to you, which are now called orbs, and orbs is a generational term. They all mean the same thing. This is Sir Edmund Halley, discoverer of Halley's Comet, going back in history in the 1700s. He had his own sighting experience. You know this person, I think, Steven Spielberg. Before he entered his Hollywood profession, he had an experience of his own. All of these reports that I just mentioned to you and many hundreds of others are in my first book here, The Humaniverse Guide to Better Reasoning and Decision Making. It's a deep dive. I consider it a reference book, which I will update in the near future. I'll be putting more cases in there, but the Betty Barney Hill, all of the cases I talked about are in there. This is the title of my second book, The Humaniverse Guide to First Contact with ET. This takes a deep dive into the hypothesis that the government popularizes that, well, if we have first contact, then our cultural institutions such as religion, philosophy, and science are going to be irreparably harmed. Well, I take a close look to test that hypothesis, whether that is to conclude, in fact, the case for that. Which brings me up to my current title here, The Humaniverse Guide, Will E.T. Talk With Us? I maintain that there's a great sense of urgency that we need to undertake to begin a comprehensive and proactive plan design. Contact is close. Those of you that believe that contact still hasn't happened yet, personally, I think it has happened, with the government and whatnot. But there's still a lot of people that think that contact hasn't happened. But not only contact, but again, I'm an advocate for the EGA and EGR that I mentioned early on. Uh, One of my rationale for getting into the research here has to do with, again, as I mentioned, the recent increase, it seems exponentially, in UFO, UAP cases and reports, especially the last few years in the US. With the US Navy incidences, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, the ATIP, Louis Elizondo, who was head of the government study force on that, brought up to today where the government now has a separate agency for UFO study. I consider that as Project Blue Book on steroids. But they are throwing a lot more money and supposed detail into studying the phenomenon. This is so new, I'm skeptical, so I'll wait to see what the government actually does in that way. But that's the first rationale that I have for advocating and promoting study. Another rationale is that we need to become, as a species, more proactive in planning for big events. It seems that by our nature, we have a proclivity for being reactive to things. Very costly, expensive, and I'm going to give you as evidenced by a couple of examples. We know what this is. We are living in it right now. I'll ask you the question for the privacy of your own thoughts, or if we can get into discussions afterwards, I'll be here the rest of the conference. Do you believe that we could have done more planning in a proactive manner for this pandemic, even though there was common knowledge that the COVID virus existed for years? We had knowledge of that. Another example, this is a poster popular during World War II. Now, it's common fact that the US was a late entry into the war. It had been raging in Europe for a couple of years before that. And we were doing a little bit of tooling up industrial-wise for something to do. And it was also common knowledge that Japan was planning a major attack on the US. But because of our reactive nature, the only way that brave soldier and those brave soldiers could enter the fray is to wait for this to happen. I think you may know that this is a photo of Pearl Harbor. How many thousands of lives, how many trillions of dollars were wasted because we were reactive?
Yeah, but they knew about it anyway. They knew it was going to happen.
They knew, yeah, they knew. Here's another, the Hilo, Hawaii newspaper, dated 1 week before the attack. We were reactive. It cost us so much. Another rationale that I have for my research and my writing is to ask the question, has any planning ever been done before in regards to not only first contact, but the EGA, EGR, acknowledgement globally of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligent life, ETI. I'm sorry with the acronyms, but they're a lot shorter than spelling, the words out and whatnot. And also enduring global relationship, the EGR. Has planning ever been done before? Well, I'll take you through a quick survey. In academia, where partly I come from, significantly I come from, researchers would write a research paper and collect their grant money on a very nuanced, fine point to do with first contact, that messaging, or how should we send a message or receive one, whatever. And then there's discussion about it later on in academia, and then they go on to the next one. The US government did undertake a study in 1960-61, and they titled it The Future of Man in Space. It was a 200-page report published by the Brookings Institute. Out of that 200 pages, 3 paragraphs were written about the subject of a possibility for meeting extraterrestrial intelligence. 200 pages, 3 paragraphs. Not really a lot. We'll fast forward a little bit. This is 1972, and this is a copy of the plaque that was sent aboard 2 Pioneer spacecraft. As you can see, whoever finds these will see the indigenous intelligent life. We're intelligent. Let's give us some credit for that. That's us. A diagram of where the ship took off from and a pictorial of the solar system. This is a navigational device. This is a photo of our sun with vectors shooting out to 14 different pulsars within our galaxy. as a homing device, so to speak, that whoever finds this can zero in on where we are. This is an example of our intelligence. This is a diagram of one atom of neutral hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most popular element, chemical element in the universe, and it's the most important. Without hydrogen, I'm not here talking, you're not here enjoying or interacting with me today. And it's also very important in communication, such as sending interstellar messages and radio waves of all kinds. So, an example of our intelligence.